Hello and welcome finally to the start of the Race Weekends Data Analysis series. I'm so very excited to start this, and it is of course the practice edition for Bahrain. It is currently 25 minutes-ish until qualifying starts, so I've not yet seen that as it hasn't started, as I just said, but we are looking at the practice data. I'm mainly going to be comparing the teammate performances as I just don't have access to all of the long run data, so I will leave timestamps for each team, so if you'd like to skip ahead to which team you would like to look at, then please by all means do that. But today we are going to take a look at, of course, the practice edition for the race weekend data analysis for Bahrain. And so we start, of course, with practice number 1, which is led by Max Verstappen from Valtteri Bottas, Lando Norris, who splits the two Mercedes with Hamilton in P4, then Charles Leclerc putting in an insane performance in the Ferrari to go P5 as Carlos Sainz is P8, so Ferrari having a massive upturn in pace from last year. Perez almost 7/10ths down on teammate Verstappen, very similar to Albon and Gasly before. And speaking of Gasly, he has put his Alfa Tauri P7. A very strong showing from Alfa Romeo also, with a bit of a disappointing showing from Aston Martin and a very disappointing showing from Alpine. And as predicted, it is Haas and Williams at the back, with the former all the way at the back as they are not developing their car, which seems like a very stupid thing to do. But then hopping into a more representative session, and that is practice 2. This is very akin to what we are going to see come race day and especially qualifying in just a couple of moments' time. And it is Max Verstappen who once again tops the practice timing sheets. From Lando Norris, who creeps forward one position to P2, that McLaren is really working well. Mercedes is still quick, but it's just not quite as quick as it used to be. They are P3 and P5. The Alfa Tauris put in an incredible performance to go P7 and P9, just behind Daniel Ricciardo, with Lance Stroll himself poking into the top 10 as well, as Perez is again round about just over 6/10ths down on Max Verstappen, so he's still not quite got hold of that Red Bull as much as the Dutchman. Ocon has crept himself forward just a little bit, up to P11. Charles Leclerc is P12, moving a little bit further backwards down the order outside of the top 10, as the Alfa Romeos go back to sort of their normal ground to P13 and P16. Vettel is still P14 for Aston Martin, with Alonso still P15, and it is again the two Williams and the two Haas fighting for the last places on the grid. And then we head on into practice number 3, and this is a session that is dominated. Absolutely dominated by Max Verstappen, 7/10ths clear. Now this session was a little touch on the warm side, so it's not entirely representative of what we're actually going to see come qualifying in a couple of moments time, nor is it representative of what we're going to see in the race. So I imagine it's going to be more akin to what we see in practice 2, however, at this moment in time after practice, my money is definitely on Max Verstappen to get a pole position. Mercedes are both still comfortably within the top 5, however Bottas is struggling. He is not comfortable in that car, always complaining and always missing his braking points, never really hitting the apexes, and Sergio Perez is a whopping 1.3 seconds down on teammate Max Verstappen, as Carlos Sainz puts in another mega lap for Ferrari, as Kimi Raikkonen in the Alfa Romeo goes to P7, Ocon is P8 in the Alpine, and Stroll slips down to P9 from P8. Ricciardo, for the first time in his McLaren career, is ahead of Lando Norris in practice 3. Leclerc is still just outside of the top 10 like he was in practice 2. Then it's Giovinazzi, Tsunoda, Vettel, Alonso, still very disappointing, down in the second or the bottom half of the field even. And then it is Lando Norris P16, and once again the two Williams and the two Haas cars fighting for the bottom places of the field. And so if I just collate all of these times and pop them into a graph, we can see the driver progression like this. And we can see that Max Verstappen leading every single one of those sessions and is having a steady, roughly 2-ish tenth improvement between each of the sessions. However, the majority of teams and drivers actually lost time going from practice 2 to practice 3. And as practice 2 is actually the more representative session and the one that we're going to extract the most performance from, that's hardly surprising. But then just taking a look at exactly what team has improved the most, we can pull up the most improved team from FP1 to FP2, and that is Alpine, improving by 1.9 seconds. Now this is just collating all of Alpine's lap times, disregarding whichever driver it was set by, and it is the fastest FP1 time subtract the fastest FP2 time, or it's the other way around, whichever one gives a positive number, and that is repeated for every other team. Then it is Williams and Aston Martin, who both improved by 1.7 seconds, with a big drop off down to Haas at 1.2, and I've also just noticed that Mercedes is the wrong colour, that should be their nice turquoise, not grey, but it was Red Bull who gained the least from FP1 to FP2. However, if we look at FP2 to FP3, they are the only team to improve. Every other team lost time between FP2 and FP3. This isn't super uber relevant, but it's very interesting to see that Red Bull were the only improvers out of the entire field. And so with the small practice overview all done and dusted, we're going to take a look at the teammate battles so far. Now, like I said, they are timestamped, so if you like to just skip ahead to whichever team you want to look at, by all means, please do so. And we are, of course, going to start with Mercedes. This is going in the 2020 championship order. So on screen, on the very left, we can see the FP1, FP2, and FP3 positions. Now, this is going to form a nice positional graph. Unfortunately, it's only round 1, so there isn't too much to look at on here. The only interesting thing so far is the middle graph, the Mercedes practice progression. So we can see them nice improving from practice 1 to practice 2, but then losing that time, losing about a tenth, just over a tenth, towards practice 3, with Bottas having an enormous pace drop. What's that, about 6/10 he lost between his FP2 time and FP3 time. Definitely not a happy bunny. And at the largest gap in the top right, we can see that Hamilton was ahead by 0.5 seconds. Hamilton are all of the black bars, and Valtteri Bottas are all of the turquoise bars. Now, the average gaps underneath that one on the far right-hand side, or in the bottom right-hand side, that will update as we go through the season. Unfortunately, it's round 1. I don't have any average data to collect so far, just one race, so it's exactly the same as the gaps that exist at the moment. And in terms of head-to-head, again, this is fairly boring at the moment, but it will improve. It is 1-0 to Valtteri Bottas in practice 1, and then 1-0 to Lewis Hamilton in practice 2 and 3. And so with Mercedes done and dusted, we take a look at Red Bull, and this is very dominated towards Max Verstappen, much like we saw in the case of the Albon performances and also the Gasly performances. P1 in every single session for the Dutchman, and significantly faster than Sergio Perez in every single session. I can give it a little bit of leeway for Sergio Perez. It is his first Grand Prix weekend with Red Bull, so I can understand if he is a touch on the slow side. But definitely, first things off the bat, to be 6.5 tenths down in FP1 and FP2, and then 1.3 seconds down in FP3, that's really not the performance you want to be giving on your first impression. But I do hope that Sergio can actually improve this and bring that gap a lot closer and actually challenge Max Verstappen. That will be awesome to see. And again, it's still a current whitewash so far in the practice head-to-head in favour of Max Verstappen. And then leaving Red Bull, we head on into McLaren, P3 in the Constructors last year. And now this is fairly even at the moment between Daniel Ricciardo in the blue and Lando Norris in the orange. Again, in terms of the positions, it's going to need a couple more races to start forming some nice little graphs. Round 1, it's always a little bit iffy, but it is 1-0 to Lando Norris in FP1 and FP2, and 1-0 to Ricciardo in FP3, with the average gaps being roughly 3 to 4 tenths between the two drivers so far, with a 5-tenth gap between the two in FP1. But again, I can give it to Daniel Ricciardo for a couple races just to get used to running with McLaren and getting used to the car. And then from McLaren, we leave to go to Aston Martin. Now, we've got Sebastian Vettel in the dark green and Lance Stroll in the pink. I may change up these colours because I don't think I'm too big of a fan of the pink. I may change it to a sort of lighter green, a lime green, like it should be. Bad BWT, but no worries, not the end of the world. Sebastian Vettel, again, it's like one of those drivers I'm going to have to wait a couple races for him to click and get comfortable with the car, as the only session he was in front was FP1, and that was just by 0.07 of a second. Not the biggest of margins whatsoever. And then Lance Stroll to be a consistent 3.5, 3.7 tenths in front of Vettel in FP2 and FP3. That's fairly strong. He needs to get a good start to the season ahead of Vettel before he gets up to speed. Otherwise, it may turn out to be a whitewash in the Germans' favour. Not 100% sure yet. And then leaving Aston Martin, we head on into Alpine. Now, this is very surprising. I was pleasantly surprised, I think, by this. Esteban Ocon was the dominant Alpine driver, not Fernando Alonso. Fernando Alonso was always pootling around in P15 sort of realm. Now, that's not where I thought he was going to be, and especially to be behind Esteban Ocon by, on average, across the 3 sessions, about 3 tenths, just under 3 tenths of a second. That's not what I expected at all. Now again, it's his first race back, so like Ricciardo, Sainz and Perez as well, and Vettel, I'm going to have to give him a couple more races just to get up to speed. So for Ocon, this is ideal. For Alonso, not so ideal. And speaking of Ferrari, we then delve on into the Scarlet team. Now this is again actually slightly dominated towards Carlos Sainz. Now this has actually caught me a little bit by surprise. I was expecting Charles Leclerc to be the more dominant Ferrari man, as only he's led FP1 ahead of Carlos Sainz. That didn't really make too much sense, but I'll roll with it at the moment. And then FP2 and FP3 were dominated by Carlos Sainz, being about, just about 4 tenths in front on average between the 2 sessions. Now they are fairly even, although it doesn't look like it. Whenever one of them is in front, it is roughly by the same margin that the other one is in front by. They have very similar average gaps so far, but again, we're just going to have to wait for a couple more races and a couple more bits of data points to pop in before I make some massive comparisons and determine which races were good and therefore which races were bad. But then heading into the lower reaches of the midfield, we head on into Alfa Tauri. Now this was... I'm not sure how to describe this one. So, FP1, the gap to Gasly and Tsunoda was 1.1 seconds in favour of the Frenchman. Now, that could just be a little bit of an outlier. We then head to FP2, and it is Tsunoda who is in front in the white. And that's only by about 2 tenths of a second. And then come FP3, they both lose time, but Tsunoda loses a significant chunk. About a second, just over a second, and the gap between the two again is 1.1 seconds in favour of Gasly. Not particularly consistent at all, but again, it's his first race, he is a rookie, so I'm going to give it to him and just see if he improves that consistency and see if he makes any better strides to be more consistent towards Gasly also. And then from AlphaTauri, we head on into Alfa Romeo, and this is actually led by Giovinazzi so far. Again, pleasantly surprised by this. This is what I expected to see from Giovinazzi last year, not this year. It's something that he should have done last year, and then perhaps that could have put him in a better standing for that Ferrari seat over Sainz, but who knows. Currently he's leading FP1 and FP2 by about 2 tenths across the 2 sessions, whereas Kimi Räikkönen has led FP3 by about 3 tenths at the moment. Again, going to need a couple more data points throughout the year to pinpoint when there's a bad race and when there is a good race. And then penultimately we take a look at Haas. And Haas, I think this is fairly predictable at the moment, but personally, I'm actually quite surprised at how quickly Schumacher has gotten up to speed. Seeing as his trend so far between F3 and F2 is he takes a season and takes a little while to get up to speed before he starts putting in decent performances, he is clearly inherently quicker than Mazepin so far. Interestingly, they both follow the same progression as well, so both cars are being pushed to the maximum at the moment. There's not one driver that's doing something slightly different. They both follow the same progression, unlike some of the other teams that we have seen. But so far, this is a whitewash towards Schumacher, which is definitely going to please a lot of people. And then finally, we take a look at Williams, which, no surprise here, it is dominated by George Russell in the white, with Nicholas Latifi in the blue. Not much else I can really say here. Nicholas Latifi, I thought he was going to be a little bit better and perhaps in front of the Haases, as that's seemingly where Williams is. Like George Russell, he was ahead of both Haases in every single session. I'd have liked to have seen that from Nicholas Latifi, but we haven't quite. And in terms of the gaps, they're sort of sporadic. They're not really consistent throughout either of the sessions, but it's just showing that George Russell really does deserve a much better seat than he currently holds. And there we go, there is all of the practice data so far concluded. I think sometime after the Grand Prix, when I have all of the race data and I've done the qualifying edition and I've done the race edition, I will then pop out my driver of the weekend categories, where we'll be taking a look at 28 mathematical categories across all of this data. I think there's about 6, 7-ish for practice. At the moment, again, there is a series that I'll pop in the link in the description and in a card in the corner to where you can go and look at the maths behind each of these categories. But that is all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed, and I'm so very glad to be starting this season from scratch, and it is so very good to be back commentating on F1 again.